Hi, folks. Peter Schein here again to talk about organizational culture with you. So in I think it was our second video, we talked about our model for the practice of culture. And what our today's topic is called something we call metaculture, which is what we view as a sort of a visual for how to think about where culture is going or the future of culture. So Ed's going to recap this practice of culture model, and then we'll get into metaculture.
All right. Hello, folks. Glad to see you all again. And let's start again with realizing that the word culture has many references. There's the culture for the whole group, but when we look at any given organization, we realize immediately that we have to think about three different aspects of the culture of an organization. The technical, which refers to the fundamental strategy and reason for the organization's existence in the first place, which creates the products and services that society condones. And that is conceptually different from that same organization then having to create a human organization that implements the various elements of that strategy and makes it all happen. And that, of course, all occurs in what we are referring to as the macro culture, that whole organization exists within a society that has its own values and its own culture and consists of several occupations that make both the social and technical culture work. And so as we start to think about how this unfolds over time and how we can begin to anticipate what might happen in each of these arenas, the technical or the social or the macro, it will be useful to remember to differentiate them and not to fall into just talking about a general concept of culture, but to stick to these different categories because they each are important in their own way as they unfold. And now let's talk about how this unfolding begins. Peter?
So what we're really getting at in this presentation today is the notion of not letting culture happen to you as an organization. You know, that technology doesn't happen to you as an organization, and we don't think culture should happen to you either. But we're also aware that, you know, we live in a really, really volatile and unpredictable world, and macro culture is changing continually. And we view macro culture changing as something that can be predicted and anticipated. As you know, threats to our structure and practice, and we're proposing to you all that culture is no less predictable than technology. We just have to make an effort to do it, to go through the process of culture scenario planning, and think of it as something that's every bit as practical and prudent as strategic scenario planning, which we do all the time. As you know, complex, large organizations, we're continually strategic scenario planning. What we're talking about today is culture scenario planning. So how will new intentions, both our own and some of our newest employees, coming from the outside in, impact existing conventions of how we've always done things? And this really stems off the idea that metaculture, meaning trends that will impact the practice of our culture, come from a future that is here, just not evenly distributed yet. In other words, this great William Gibson quote, we've all experienced this, how we see something new and we're thinking, wow, that is different. That's going to impact my life. Whether it's a new value or new practice, or maybe most sort of imminently in an organization, some of our youngest employees may accept certain things. Accepted reality in their minds may be very different than what's the accepted reality in the minds of some of our older employees. So this is our image of metaculture to keep in mind. And again, what we're really talking about today is, can you set up systems and groups within your organization to actively try to anticipate, to do the culture scenario planning in order to get ahead of some of these impacts. Again, why should culture happen to you? If technology doesn't happen to you, we get ahead of technology trends all the time. Let's try to do it with culture as well. So the next slide is an example of how you might start to do a sort of a structured cataloging and anticipating of metaculture impacts that you need to be aware of and you need to be intentional about for the future of your organization. This is an image of just some ideas that came to us, and these are just our crazy ideas. Don't necessarily assume any of these apply to your business, but we'll give you an example of what we mean. Ed, do you want to start us off?
When you think about scenario planning, what usually is one way to do it is to take one of these elements and say, well, supposing this is the major one that will happen, and then see how that would impact others. So supposing that global warming really is going to be the major issue of the next 10, 20 years, what would that mean for the degree of connectedness that is just beginning now among the major countries that will control how we handle the environment? What would it mean if we took that seriously and imagined the whole world collaborating? And how would that then even affect what we might think of as climate justice? Would it be fair to have some countries do all the connecting while other countries are simply allowed to do what they're going to do? The idea being that to be a just climate, we would have to share equally in this future scenario each of our contributions. Supposing we said that, well, design thinking is obviously so successful in software development and in some of the linear tasks that have to be done today. Supposing we imagine in a future scenario that everything in the all three elements of the culture, the technical, the social, and the macro will be done in a, plan fast, do fast, and then pick up the pieces and redo it. Supposing that became the major way of the future. Or take the idea of flat organizations. Supposing the future is moving in the direction of systematic flattening for everything, that even those organizations that work best as hierarchies might begin to think that maybe we should be flatter, and let's imagine a world in which there is less and less hierarchy, less and less use of power, more and more use of self-organization and collaboration. And that would lead to maybe the idea, maybe we need to do some scenarios on supposing we really did give power to the various units of the organization that make us go. Supposing we relied much more on self-organization and self-management, what might that look like? How would it influence the other parts of our organizational life? And that leads to the final possibility that supposing what's really ahead is that people are going to stop separating work and their private and family life in the degree to which the current conventions have started us, but where the pandemic has shown us very well that we may not be able to sustain the old system of work is in the office and everything else is at home and in the community. Suppose the analysis of the future in the scenario would examine what would the world be like if we went even farther in work at home and allowed family and community work to mesh with the work of getting products and services out. So the idea is not to try to do all of these, but to do scenarios around where we begin to see some changes. And Peter will talk about what's on the other side of this slide.
Right. Just to pick up on, when we talk about climate justice, we recognize that there's also a big movement around social justice. This, whatever example or dimension you choose, social justice is one of those terms that we hear more and more, and we have to be ready for, we have to be aware of. Similarly, if we talk to a 20-something in our organization and ask them what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, DE&I, that may be something that their sense of it may be something dramatically different than DE&I to some of our older employees. So what are we doing in our HR programs or our OD programs around DE&I? And we better make sure that we're anticipating what that means for some of our youngest employees or our future hires. And there's a similar idea that's come up, this idea of the YOLO economy, which is a term I love. It's kind of a superset of the Great Resignation idea that we've been talking about over the last year or so. And that is that younger, presumably mostly younger generations of the workforce have a different tolerance for jobs that they hate. You only live once, YOLO. And so living or tolerating a job that we don't like in the YOLO economy isn't tolerated. So we leave and we go find another job. And when we're looking at a immediate future where unemployment is very low, there seems to be all sorts of power expressed by the entry levels of organizations just not tolerating positions that they don't enjoy. You only live once. So that's our reference to the YOLO economy. I think it's going to impact different parts of the country and different segments of the economy in different ways. But again, let's anticipate how that's going to impact our organization. Similarly, what the U.S., we're not the first to say it, and we won't be the last to say it, is so politically divided. How is that, and expressed in deep cultural terms, not just in sort of, arcane or technical political terms? It's really expressed in deep cultural ways. How is that divide in the U.S. going to either resolve over the next few years or widen over the next few years? And are we ready for the impact that it's going to have as we go out and try to recruit new people or retain some of our most critical employees? And then this last one is sort of, again, this is a little bit out there. We're just kind of throwing ideas out. But since we're coming to you from Silicon Valley, this is something that we tend to see, is that kids may spend far more time in their teens learning how to code than they do learning how to write. And so they may be, great at sort of ad hoc, software development at any layer of the stack, but they may not be very good at, traditional American English verbal communication. And are we ready for that? How are we going to adjust to that? How are we going to make adaptations in our technical culture and social culture in order to leverage that, right? If that's a new skill set, what can we do in a positive way to leverage that? So anyway, this is our rendering of a quick notion of metaculture scenario planning. Anybody's list in this cloud is going to be different, and it should be different. We're not trying to be particularly prescriptive of anything that we're commenting on. It's just a process that we should go through. And in fact, ideally, you might even have processes within the organization where you have different pockets in different parts of the organization that go through their own culture scenario planning process, developing some of these metaculture clouds, and then starting to compare them and say, well, this one clearly is going to impact both of our subgroups within the organization, and this one maybe not. And start to develop a priority list, if you will, of some of these metaculture impacts that are most likely to hit you in the future, as it were. So that's the idea of metaculture, and that's part of the vocabulary that we wanted to sort of leave you folks with. Again, to the point that Ed made earlier, generalizations about culture as one idea, one word, generally are going to leave you without answers, whereas being very specific about culture problems expressed in the terms of the business problems that you face allows you a specificity that you can really start attacking some of these issues going forward. So Ed, any other comments?
I just would add that the way to do this is not to be overwhelmed by these 10 or 12 items and say, oh my God, too much is going to change. The idea of scenario planning is to maybe look at that whole list and say, do we see any of these that really looks like it's coming and it's going to hit us? Then take that one in considerable detail and say the way the scenario process works is to take that to the extreme and see what might it look like if the world really went that way. And the one that, of course, is my favorite is, of course, climate change and global warming. I think it would be very important to start scenarios on supposing this does really happen, supposing it gets 2 to 5 degrees higher within the next 5-10 years. What are the implications of that? Not just to dream about it or to worry about it, but to start making lists and figure out what might that actually do. That's what good scenario planning would reveal, would force you to think more concretely about one or more of these possible metacultural themes.
So that kind of wraps up today's video, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.